Hey everybody, welcome back to our Bible study in Ecclesiastes. This week we're in chapter 11, and the title is Remain Faithful. Just remain faithful. That's what we're going to talk about this week, is how to do that. But before we do, let's review chapter 10 from last week. Heed these words to the wise. And there was a lot of words to the wise there, but what I remember most is the first verse. Here's what it said. It said, as dead flies cause the perfumer's ointment to stink, so also does a little foolishness to one's reputation of wisdom and honor. In other words, a little foolishness can do major damage to your character and to your reputation. And I remember that question from last week based on that verse. Are there any dead flies that need to be removed from the perfume of your life? So Solomon gave us a list, if you will, of some dead flies. He said that we should avoid foolish honor, foolish works, foolish conversations, foolish choices, and foolish thoughts. These are all dead flies that can really ruin the perfume of our life. Do you have anything in your life that you need to get rid of today? And so now in chapter 11, we're going to learn about remaining faithful. And Solomon encourages us to remain faithful to the Lord, and he covers a short list of ways to do so. Let's look at the first one. Practice faithfulness, verses 1 and 2. That's simple enough, right? Just practice faithfulness. Let's look at verses 1 and 2. It says, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a servant to 7 and also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be done on the earth. Practicing faithfulness. How are these verses teaching us the lesson of faithfulness? Well, first of all, we have to have faith to cast our bread into an unknown sea, right? And only by the act of faith can faith bear fruit. And those verses there are talking about diversification, and they're saying be liberal with your faith. So then God can give liberally back to you. I think about Luke 6:38. Here's what it says. It says, give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together and running over will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. In other words, however you measure your faith out to others, however you cast your bread, how much bread you're willing to cast on the water, that same measure and scoop is going to be the measurement that God uses to give it all right back to you. There's an old saying, you can't outgive God. And I think about Malachi 3, verse 10. It says, bring all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. And try me now in this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such blessing that there'll not be room enough to receive it. Wow. Don't you want those kind of blessings from the Lord? Well, he says, first, practice faithfulness. Give to my house. Bring the tithe into the storehouse. By the way, a tithe is 10%. And so we're taught in God's word that we should give a tithe of everything that we possess. 10% of your paycheck, 10% of your riches. And you know, the Bible also teaches that not only are we to give a tithe, but we're to give offerings. In other words, a tithe, it already belongs to God. He's just saying, bring it into the storehouse and I'll give it back to you. But also, we're taught to give an offering. That's above and beyond the tithe. So the tithe, it's like the lowest common denominator. It's what's expected. But then we should have enough faith to give offerings above that. Cast your bread upon the waters. That's what we're learning here. So how does one remain faithful? Well, according to what we just learned, we need to practice faithfulness. But not only that, in verses 3 through 5, we need to avoid excuses for not being faithful. Let's look at those verses. Verse 3 says, "If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it shall lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. And you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child. So you do not know the works of God who makes everything." We're talking about avoiding excuses. In verses 3 and 4, it told us if we worry about things that we have no control over, we'll never accomplish anything. So let me ask you this question. What are our excuses? And what do they keep us from doing faithfully? In verse 5, we're told to not look at the circumstances around us without including God's power in the equation. Listen, if we just look at the circumstances of life, we'll easily be discouraged. We'll easily lose faith. But when we look at the circumstances of life through the power of God, then we don't need to make excuses. We can avoid all excuses. We can live faithfully, and we can go forward trusting in Him. And then the next thing Solomon tells us is to just work hard. Look at verse 6. It says, "In the morning sow your seed, and in the evening do not withhold your hand. For you do not know which will prosper, either this or that, or whether both alike will be good." Just work hard. He said, work hard in the morning, work hard in the evening. Here's a question. How does verse 6 relate to the work you're doing right now in your life? You know, back in verse 1, it said, "Cast your bread upon the water." And now here in verse 6, it says, "Sow your seed." And it also says, don't withhold your hand from that work. It says to work faithfully both morning and evening. So you want to know how to live faithfully for the Lord? Well, a part of that is just plain old hard work. And then we see in verses 7 and 8, when a person gets old. Let's read those verses. "Truly the light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to behold the sun. But if a man live many years and rejoices in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. All that is coming is vanity." So he's talking about the days of darkness. He's talking about when we grow old. So here's a question. What do you think your life and faith will be like when the dark days come? You know, in these verses, what we learn is that your working faith will one day become a memorial faith. In other words, it'll no longer be a faith about what you can do because you'll be too old to really do much of anything, but it'll become a faith about what you did. In other words, the days are coming that you won't be able to do a whole lot for the Lord, so you need to do it now while the sun is shining. That's what he's teaching us in those verses. Don't think that you can wait until you get old to do great things for God. When you get old, the dark days come. There'll be many, and you won't be able to do much for God. So do it now. Do it while the sun is shining. And then in verse 9, he talks about while you are young. "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these, God will bring you into judgment." While you're young. What are some things you can accomplish while you're young? Think about that a minute. You know, while you're young, you are most able to accept challenges and attempt brave adventures. You have the strength and the stamina to do amazing things. For example, you could hike the Appalachian Trail. You could sail around the world. People do that. You can jump out of a perfectly good airplane. You're in the perfect position to be a hero, to do things for the greater good without expectation of personal gain. You know, some young people go to war. Some rescue victims. Others fight fires. And yet others take the gospel to unreached people groups. You know, you just need to surrender your life to anything that Christ would ask you to do while you're young. Now let's talk about the conclusion in verse 10. Look at what it says. It says, "Therefore remove sorrow from your heart and put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity." One last verse, one conclusion from Solomon. He's basically saying, live a life that God would judge as faithful. We're talking about remaining faithful. And in that verse 10, Solomon says, put away a sorrowful heart and an evil flesh. Don't let those things get in the way of your faithfulness. And he says, begin to live a life that brings all glory and honor to God. He talks about being a child. He says, as a child and a youth, most of us have no life purpose. We're just living for ourselves. We're just enjoying life. We're basically playing and hanging out and thinking, well, when we become an adult, we'll figure it out, right? But you know, as adults, we must put away childish things and we must focus on being faithful to something. I think about 1 Corinthians 11:13. I know you've heard this verse. It says, when I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I become a man, I put away childish things. So again, we're talking about remaining faithful to the Lord. And we're talking about the ways that we can work at remaining faithful. Let's just review those. Solomon said that we need to practice faithfulness. He said that we need to avoid excuses. We need to work hard. We need to realize that one day we're going to be old and we need to do the hard work now. I'm reminded of an old saying. It says, pay now, play later. Play now, pay later. Think about that one. And he also talked about while you're young, all the things that you can do. While you're young, you can do great things for the Lord. You can do great things for mankind. So here's that verse again. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I become a man, I put away childish things. And I started living a life faithful to God. And I got serious about what he would want me to be faithful to do. What does God want you to be faithful to do with your life? I want to end with the quote by Philip Zimbardo. Listen to this. He says, our time is brief and it'll pass no matter what we do. So let's have purpose in spending it. Let us spend it so that our time matters to each of us and matters to all those whose lives we touch. Our lives matter. Our faithfulness to God matters. The way that we live our lives matter. We need to remain faithful from beginning to end. I encourage you today to remain faithful in your walk with the Lord. No matter what comes, no matter what challenges we face, we can remain faithful. Now, I hope this Bible study has been a blessing to you. And think about this. Next week is chapter 12. It's the last chapter, and it's going to be good. So be sure that you come back for that final chapter. We're going to wrap up Ecclesiastes. It's been a joy to go through it. I hope it's been a blessing to you. And remember, remain faithful.